Okay, this is Mock English version 6, which is currently part of extra mock set 3. Some of you may not be on that set, and that is subject to change in the future. So it is currently March 3rd for another 30 minutes of 2019. At this time, this is included as extra set 3. I may move this. I move around my mock versions based on what the test is looking the most like at a given moment. Last night, I recorded the mock math in this manner where I had the answers and the class numbers filled in, and that worked pretty well. So I'm going to try it for English. And essentially, because of the placement of this mock, because of how many mocks you have probably taken by the time you get here, I am not going to explain every question at all. There's going to be questions that I just give you the answer. I just state what I have circled here. Of course, you can get clarification on any of them. When you're this late in the game, as far as studying, and, you know, this could all sound crazy at some point because this could actually end up a year from now being the first mock that you see. So if this is one of the first 2 or 3 mocks that you're seeing, ignore me for a second. If this is the 5th or 6th mock you're seeing, as it is currently, by now you have most of your content down. If you have questions that are missed, I strongly encourage you, and most of you do this anyway, so I'm not saying that you wouldn't, to take the answer I gave you, rework the question. Of course, when you answer your questions in the first place on the mocks, and certainly when you rework a question because you've missed it, make sure that you are doing that using the strategy. If ever you feel like, oh, I can't really recall that strategy, or I don't really feel like I can implement that strategy right now, that's why you're missing the question, of course. The strategies in my program are by far the most important thing that you get from me. You get all kinds of content. You get all kinds of everything. The strategies are key. Another tutor could take all the content I use, all the things I talk about, and not put strategy to it, and it wouldn't help you any more than the book did. And that's the truth of the matter. That's really how I feel about that. So you should be using your strategy on every question. If you're starting up any of the mock sets and you realize, you know, I kind of just did a wing it type of thing there rather than really using my strategies, you must apply your strategies. If you come to me and you say, I'm really bad at simple, compound, complex sentence structures, I'm going to immediately know in my head you're not applying that strategy, or you're not fully applying it, or you're not understanding a part of the strategy, because that strategy is foolproof. Once you have that strategy down, you literally can't miss one of those questions unless you misread it and you're trying to do a simple when it's asking you for a compound, which I mentioned because that happens to me pretty frequently on the test. So always read a question twice. And when you've answered the question, it's a really good idea to actually read it one more time, even though you've got your answer selected. So when you get some of these wrong, rework them, rework the strategy, really work to understand why it works the way it works. Hopefully the ones you miss are the ones I explain, which more often than not they will be, because that's how I decide which ones to talk about. They're the ones that are harder or more commonly missed. So if I blow over one, it's less commonly missed. Then ask me. So really try to work it and understand on your own why you got it wrong. And I say that because that process, going through that process with yourself, where you go back, you acknowledge you missed it, you follow the process again, you take into account any suggestions if I made them, and then you try to re-answer it, that's going to be the best learning you can get. And that really applies to anything that you're missing. And again, most of you, that's what you do anyway. Most of you don't miss a question and just shoot it off to me. Most of you miss a question, try to figure out why or how you missed it. And then if you're having trouble with that or something's missing there, then you send it to me. So that's the best case scenario. Not from my standpoint. I could answer questions all day long because I wrote the curriculum, but from your learning and finalizing strategy standpoint. Question 1 is one of the fluency questions. There's something called clarity and something called fluency. In English 1, we did 3 things that have to do with that. We did correctness, which in English 1 context is like, you know, are the commas in the right place? Are the conjunctions used right? Simple things like that. English 2, we talk about other punctuations that are more auxiliary. But in English 1, it's just, are the commas or the colons or the semicolons placed correctly? So that would be which of these sentences is correct. And you'll see a couple of those here. Number 3 is an example. Then there's which of these sentences displays the best clarity, or which of these sentences is the clearest, like you see in 2 and 4. And that's going to be more like the way that they write the sentence, the way they put the modifiers and descriptors is wrong in several of them, and then it's right in one of them. And it's much less trying to figure out where a comma goes and much more trying to figure out which one very clearly, no matter who reads it, describes something to where you have the correct visual image. That's why it's clarity. Is if you think about what it means to you to get clarity on something, that probably means whatever was said that you heard was 100% clear to you. You're not mixed up. You're not uncertain of what they were trying to say. And that's what you're looking for clarity. Is you read a sentence, it gives you a visual image, and it's 100% clear. And there's no, is that what they meant? Or is this what they meant? And then fluency is typically that word doesn't have to be with a particular question, nor does the word clarity. Obviously, those are words we use in our real life. But generally on the TEAS, if it's fluency, it's where they give you like a bunch of pieces of information and you're trying to put them together in the best possible way. You've seen on a lot of my mocks and a lot of the stuff from English 1 that a lot of times those fluencies say one sentence. Not only do you have to make a fluent sentence, you have to make it in one single sentence. It doesn't always say that. This one does not say that. It says, which of the following best combines the above sentence fragments fluently? You have 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences in the original, and you are tasked with reading those, understanding how they go together. A lot of times when they list them right here, they don't list them in order. So you're actually right from the get-go, you're having to figure out what goes with what so that you can understand it in the first place. What are they trying to say? Why are these the 4 pieces of information that are here? And then you're putting them together in the most fluent way. One of the things I've suggested to students who are struggling with this type of question is kind of labeling the fragments as pairing together. So what I like to do is have a 1 and a 2. Most fluency questions, there are 4 pieces. Very rarely is there more or less than that. If there's 4 pieces, you're going to have 2 1s and you're going to have 2 2s. And the reason I say that is 2 of the fragments will obviously need to be put together. So you're going to need to say them one after the other, and then same with the other 2. In this case, we have went to the doctor, got a prescription for a muscle relaxer, new medication is stronger, didn't make plans for the day. So going to the doctor and being prescribed a new muscle relaxer, those go together. There's no scenario where you can make a fluent sentence and split those up. So I label those 1, or however you want to label them. The other 2 also go together because it says the new medication is strong. She didn't make plans. They're trying to give causation there. Because it's stronger than what she's used to, she didn't make plans. That's not a coincidence. Those aren't separate facts. Those are pieces of the puzzle that go together. So I'm going to label those 2. You only need to do that if you kind of go through your answers and you're uncertain of which one. So if you see them arranged a couple different ways and you're not sure which way you should arrange it, that's what you would want to do. If it's fairly clear to you what goes together and the answers are fairly clear, you don't probably have to go to that trouble, although it only takes a second. So the reason that this is A, the 2 that I eliminated quickly, let me see. I believe I eliminated B and C really quickly. So B starts out good. After returning from the doctor, she takes her newly prescribed muscle relaxer. You can see what's going on. They're paired the way they're supposed to be. 1 is paired with 1, and it tells you what was prescribed. But then it says, she then did not make plans. The word then does not give cause. To say then is to say what happened next. So the problem with B is it doesn't tie together the stronger medicine, which it also doesn't say it's stronger. It just says it's a muscle relaxer. So that's also an important piece of context missing. And then it says she didn't make plans, and it acts like those don't go together. That it's a coincidence and they're just telling you one more thing about her day. So that's why I took B out. C kind of does the same thing. So it says she went to the doctor, returned with her new muscle relaxer, and then there should be a sentence break here. So this is 1 sentence, and it's a case where 1 sentence is not a good thing. These cannot be done in 1 sentence. The second part of this one is worse than B. Not doing anything for the rest of the day is awkward. And again, there's no causation there. Not doing anything for the rest of the day, the way they have that written, would mean that this continues directly to this. So to connect those that directly, you'd have to say something like, Julie was firmly planted on her couch, not doing anything for the rest of the day. Those go together. She plants herself on the couch, not doing anything the remainder of the day. Here we don't see them go together. We don't know why she's not doing anything. There's a very awkward break in a sentence. We're missing the fact that it's a stronger muscle relaxer, which you don't have to capture every word. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to capture words that are important. What's important to these fragments is she goes to the doctor. She gets a stronger muscle relaxer than what she's accustomed to. She's afraid she's going to get drowsy, and you infer that. Therefore, she does not make plans for the day because she's afraid she may be extra drowsy. So B and C being gone gives me A and D. That makes it easy because if you read D, it is the clunkiest, longest, most extraneous. There's all kinds of extra stuff in there. It's really, really bad. When you're comparing A against D, A is clearly the one that's assembled fluently. 2 is a clearest, so clarity question. What they're trying to do with 2 is say that there is a red barn, and this red barn has a big door. This red barn with this big door was knocked over by the wind. To do that, again, you can label 1 and 1, 2 and 2. The red barn cannot be separated from the big door. Those have to go together. There's no way it'll work if red barn and big door are not together. It's also true that you would have to say red barn before you could say big door, because you can't say big door and then mention that you're talking about a door that's on a barn, right? So what's wrong with some of the answers that I didn't pick? I picked A. So like B, what I wrote down next to B, this is what I did in class, is I wrote down on the side essentially what the answer choice is actually doing. What this answer is saying is that the wind has a red door. I don't remember what B looks like, so I'm going to read it right now just like you are. Sorry, I have that written next to A, but that's supposed to go with B. The red barn was knocked over by the wind with the red door. So what I'm getting at is wind with the red door. The with goes directly to the wind. That is quite literally saying the wind has a red door. Much more minor, we don't want the word red used twice. We only want to say red when we're saying barn. The door is not red to our knowledge. That's a minor detail. You might notice that, you might not. That's never going to be the deciding factor on an answer. It's always going to be a more extreme problem than that. The problem is it says by the wind with the red door. Wind with the red door says wind has a red door with it. C, what I wrote next to C was says just door knocked over. It is not possible for a barn that has a giant door to have that door knocked over. Think about that in a detailed way. Think about your visual imagery. You could knock a door off. A door could be torn or ripped or knocked off of a barn, but it couldn't be knocked down. You could knock a barn down. You could knock a tree down. You could knock a fence down. But when something is attached to something bigger and sturdier, that's not how we would say that. I'm not saying it's not possible that the door gets ripped off and the barn doesn't fall down. I'm saying if that were the case, you would say the door was ripped off, torn off, detached from the barn, not knocked over. For something to get knocked over, it can't be attached to something else unless the something else also gets knocked over. That's just practical life that I'm using there. So the way that I came up with the fact that that's what that says, the big door on the red barn was knocked over. So the on the red barn is an extra descriptor the way that they have it parked. So what it says is the big door was knocked over with the wind. The other problem is it was knocked over with the wind. With the wind actually means the wind got knocked over, and so did the door. If you're still having problems on clarity, the reason I slowed way down on this first page is clarity is one of the things I get the most complaints about. Really think about these, and YouTube has such awesome features in the sense of being able to hear me say this 10 times. So if I'm speaking faster than you're picturing, back me up 15, 30 seconds, listen to it again, look at each answer choice, listen to what I'm saying that it says. And if you don't quite click, back that crap up, listen to what I'm saying it says again until you go, oh, I see why she's saying that the language is saying that. So what this says is the big door on the red barn. On the red barn is just a modifier to big door in this case. It's not saying the two of them. It's not giving them equal credence. It's saying the big door was knocked over, and it doesn't say by the wind, which is how you get knocked over. You get knocked over by something, but with the wind. So it's saying just the door and not the barn got knocked over, and it's saying that the wind also got knocked over. D, what I wrote next to D is red door barn. And what I mean here is they said the big red door barn. Door is obviously misplaced. It needs to be described as a door that's on the barn. So it's awkward to begin with because of that. But if you say the big red door barn, you are naming it a red door barn. Is there a barn out there in the United States that has a red door on it and it's called the red door barn? Probably. But clearly that's not what we're trying to say here. We're trying to say the barn is red and it has big doors. So we left out the descriptor of big, and then we tossed door in a really awkward place where it's basically naming this thing the red door barn. Not good. Very awkward. 3, I have A as well. This is for correctness. This is clarity. This is exactly the same kind of question that we just answered, but they asked for most correct. Why can they do that? Because anything they ask you on English, technically speaking, they are asking you for it to be correct. So in order to be clear, it has to be correct. In order to be correct, it would have to be somewhat clear. I'll go through this one kind of slowly too, because this is one of the main things some of you really dislike. Here's what I wrote down next to B, C, and D. B, I wrote, and again, I've got quotes around it like they named it this. Turbo engine blue car. Recognize that from what we just said about the last answer. The blue engine, the turbo engine blue car. They are calling it turbo engine blue car. That is not what we're going for. We're trying to say it's a blue car. It's got a turbo engine. It was pulled over, and this happened on the highway. On C, what I wrote is that the engine, sorry, I keep writing these a line up from where I'm trying to, so that goes there. On C, I wrote engine is blue and turbo. And this is just what I write down is what comes to mind when I read one of these. That's exactly what you should be doing. And what I've noticed for students, because I've dealt with this exact content for a long time and adapted to it, for most of you, you'll read something and you may not put your finger on it like that. You may not go, oh, that's funny. It says turbo engine blue car, like that's its name. You can get to that point. You might be getting to that point now. What probably happens for you is you read it and you go, it's kind of awkward. And initially you can't put your finger on why it's awkward. You'll get most of these right, even if that's as far as you get, because there will be 3 that are awkward, hopefully. There will at least be 2 that are so awkward you can't possibly miss it. Sometimes 3 of them are that awkward. If that's as far as you go, great. If you can go one step further, if you're getting advanced enough, you can handle one more way of doing things, try to actually write a comment next to it like I do. Because each one of these is wrong because it makes a statement that's not what we're trying to make. D, what I said about D is that it separates 2 important things that go together and is confusing. So where on the last question I labeled the ones, you can do that with any of these. The blue car has a turbo engine And those have to go together or it won't make sense. If you don't put those together, you'll wind up saying that the engine has a car, or you'll wind up saying that the engine got pulled over, or you'll wind up saying that it's an engine highway. I could make 5 more examples, but you get the point. Again, there is so much value in hearing me do this 5 times if you can stand it. So if you're kind of like, wait, why is she saying where is she getting that? Where does that comment come from? Back it up, back it up, back it up, back it up. Keep watching it because I'm explaining it fairly quickly. So on this one, it says on the highway. Oh, sorry. Let me go back to something. So 1 and 1 are right here. The blue car has to say with the turbo engine. And then pulled over and on the highway go together just as much as the blue car with the turbo engine. So if you initially need to figure out what your components are, it's easier to figure out components when you know the answer because it's hard to point them out if it's all jumbled up. But when you're getting near the end, you can do that. What do you notice about 2 and 3? The way I labeled the 1s and the 2s. And on the previous question, we have the same phenomenon. Was knocked over has to go with by the wind. It also has to follow the thing that did get knocked over, which is the barn. And I did my arrow in a misleading way. So you look at number 2, you look at the content, and you say to yourself, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that this barn got knocked over. That's 2 of the pieces. Then you elaborate and you say, I'm trying to say that this barn that has a big door got knocked over by the wind. So there's always a 1 and 1, 2 and 2. They're pairs. They need to stay together. What you'll notice is number 2 and 3, the 1s that I labeled, both of these are situations where you have a big thing, you have a big structure, and it has a certain feature with it. The red barn with the big door. You're focused on the barn, that's the subject, but it has a big door. Number 3, exact same structure. The blue car, that's our focus, that's our subject, with the turbo engine. They are worded identically. Anytime you're describing a big thing that so happens to have a little thing, that's how that works. So you can start to look for that. Number 4 asks for clarity, and again, very similar. I will tell you what I wrote on the wrong answers. 4 should be B. What I said about A, I almost picked A when I was flying through this quickly, so A is definitely the second closest. The problem with A, if you slow it down, is it says the old van with the flat tires, which is great, was in the garage on a lift. When you read A, you totally understood what it meant. You pictured it correctly, I guarantee you. But when it says in the garage on a lift, that says the garage is on a lift. And with modification, with clarity, it's not good enough to say, oh, but you know what I mean. You have to actually have it in the best order. So what are the things that have to go together? The old van has to go right with the flat tires, and that's structured exactly like the 2 we just dealt with. The old van with the flat tires, that's 1. The other 2 are in the garage on a lift. Now, choice A has the 1s together and the 2s together, but we need to say on a lift, which is in the garage, because the old van has flat tires and the old van is on a lift. It's lifted up in a garage. And it has to go in that order, and that's what B does. What I said about C is flat tires on a lift and van on a lift. I'll try to write that here. I don't know if it'll fit. What I said is flat tires on a lift plus van on a lift. Let's read it to find out how the heck that happened. In the garage on a lift was the flat tires and the old van. So the word "and" is what caused that. So on this lift is an old van and flat tires. Again, technically correct in a sense, right? You see what they're trying to say. And the tires are on the lift because the tires are attached to the van, which is on the lift. But we need it to be clearer than that. We need it to say the van has these tires. The van is on a lift. You don't want that "and." That made it really confusing. D, what I wrote was lift, not in garage. I'm experiencing this with you because I don't remember why I made these comments. These were my initial comments. On the lift was the old van. So that's okay. With the flat tires in the garage. So the with here and the mixing of 1 with a 2 and a 2 with a 1 causes us to not be able to tell that the lift is in the garage. Because they've got lift up here, they got garage there, so that's supposed to be a 2 and that's supposed to be a 2, and the whole point of the 1, 2 is to make sure it goes 1, 1, 2, 2, or 2, 2, 1, 1. On the lift was the old van is okay. In fact, on the lift with the old van with flat tires is okay, except we said with twice. No, we didn't. We said was. On the lift was the old van with flat tires. That's good. Whole first 3/4 of the sentence is good. But tagging in the garage on the end makes it confusing. The other thing here, just in case you are pretty good at these, is remember that what I say in class is unless you have to, and there are circumstances where you do have to, you don't want to put the descriptor or the modifier at the front. You want to start with the subject. The subject is the old van that has flat tires. The subject previously was the blue car that has the turbo engine. The subject before that was the red barn that has the big door. Whenever possible, that's what you lead with. So if you ever get rid of a couple because they make you laugh and then you got 2 left and one of them starts with on the highway, probably you want to avoid that one. Occasionally there's one that you do have to do that way. There is one in the packet from English 1 class that's that way, and I get a lot of questions about it because it is that way. 5, formal language. There's a couple of ways that we get to the conclusion of formal language. Again, if you're taking this class, you've taken a couple of my recent mocks. So I'm updating this because they're starting to get a little weird with formal language. It used to be as simple as if it's got a contraction, get rid of it, and bim, bam, boom, you got your answer. It's becoming a little fuzzier than that. They're adding some things to it. Formal language, use your instinct. Do use your instinct on formal language, but you also need to combine that instinct with skill. Do not forget your first and most important skill, which is contractions. The only thing that's totally cut and dry about these is if it has a contraction, I don't care where, how, or what, it can't be formal, and it is that cut and dry. So still start there. What you may find, depending on when you test, is that leaves you with 2 or 3 possibilities. What I've been doing with the last few versions of the mocks, version 4, 5, and 6, is I've been ensuring that you are seeing some of the weird things that might make up that choice. So we've talked about words like fun, because it's better to say enjoyed, had a good time, than it is to say fun. That's more of a kid word. We've talked about some, sounds very relative and lacks confidence. We've talked about should. And none of those in and of themselves is bad, but you'll see them appear in a certain pattern on these, and you'll start to get used to that. B is I have applied to the school multiple times. That is formal. It doesn't jump out at you as being this ridiculously formal sentence or anything like that. But when you look at I went to the meeting, that is short. It sounds like a text message. It doesn't sound like a sentence. And it says went. There's nothing wrong with went, but we often see things like attended, arrived at, something that's a little more expansive. The length of a sentence is not a dead giveaway, but a lot of times if you kind of think in terms of, would I see this in a paragraph that I'm reading, or would I see it in a text message, you will find that that helps you eliminate some. I went to the meeting is not very formal because it's very short and sounds very informal. I had fun at the meeting. I enjoyed the meeting would have changed that drastically. Again, there's nothing wrong with had fun, but if it's up against have applied, it's going to lose. And that's what I'm trying to get you used to. So that one is B. Number 6, I've resisted this question type for a long time because they do not use it much. I did this, I put this in here to alert you to the fact that you can't skim questions. And we've talked about that a ton. That's not a big surprise that I'm saying. It does say formal language. And if you were skimming, you'd be looking for a sentence that is formal. This says, in what scenario would the communication be formal? So it's kind of taking yourself outside of your normal process and just asking what a scenario is that sets that up. That's going to be C. If you did notice that and you weren't skimming, that was probably fairly easy to answer. 7, which of the following is spelled correctly? That is just from your spelling and word meanings. That list is continuously expanded. The recent mocks 4, 5, and 6 versions are helping you see some of the new ones and see how they're written. There's a couple more upcoming. Make sure you know the spellings and the word meanings. That list is part of the English 1 packet, and it is crystal clear. If something could get asked about from a spelling and definition standpoint, I have both of them on there, and I specify to you that you need both. Most of the things on that list are either spelling or their definition, and they're adjusted according to that. You don't need to know the definition of schematic. Schematic's like a blueprint. To the current moment and test set, you don't need to know the definition of it. But if you look at your spelling and word meanings and you see that it's in both, make sure you know both. 8 is a very, very simple correctness question from English 1, and you're going to answer A. As is a conjunction when it's used like it's used here. As I left for the store is creating a timeline. That means that this is a dependent clause here. That's an independent clause there. Those are separated by a comma. B doesn't work because a semicolon happens when we have 2 separate sentences that can be split, and that's not what we have here. Subatomic. So sub is the prefix you're supposed to know. There's several examples of that on your sheet. This one is not from the test, but I decided to give you a bit of a challenge with this. You guys know what sub means. You're used to sub if you've been doing what you're supposed to be doing. Subatomic makes you stretch your definition a little bit. So sub really ultimately means below or under. What I was doing with this question was to point out that can mean physically under. So like a submarine is a ship that works underwater. But it can also be below or under in hierarchy. So keep that in mind. A sub-leader is not physically sitting underneath the leader, right? They're not being sat on by the leader because they're a sub-leader. They are a leader that is below the leader. So remember that those are opposing thoughts that apply in different scenarios. Subatomic, I do have underneath an atom. If you remember anything from chemistry, my chemistry or otherwise, you can't be under an atom. Atoms are like floating through space, moving constantly. So that would not be possible. So what this is going to be is smaller than an atom. Subatomic is on a level of organization underneath the atom. 10, the best definition of incredulous. I mentioned this in a couple of the recent mocks. This is very tricky because they use some of the weirdest definitions. I've had you answer this a couple of different ways. You've never seen me use this answer. It's A, mistrusting, distrusting, not trustworthy, disbelieving, anything like that. So what you're looking for is to not, and that's the key part, not trust, not believe, not credible is the root of the definition of the word. That's what you're looking for. I put trustworthy on there because the last time I had you answer it, it was distrusting, and now it's mistrusting. Trustworthy is obviously the opposite in definition from what we're looking for. The prefix in here is referring to not, which is a prefix that I define on your spelling and word meaning list. Incredulous, not credible. 11 and 12 are capitalization. I'm about to add capitalization back into the curriculum because it's just kind of starting to surface again. It was very big on the TEAS 4 and 5. I was surprised they cut it, but it does seem to be kind of coming back. Here's the deal with capitalization. Now, I'm not going to sit here and lecture about how we capitalize cities and states and things like that. The key thing you need to know to be good at these capitalization is we capitalize a name. You're sitting there like, duh, obviously. If you say, like in number 11, it says, my Professor Henry. In that context right there, Professor Henry is not his name. His name is Henry, so Henry will always be capitalized. But if you put the word my, then you're going to say my professor, because you could say my professor about anybody. That's not a pronoun. That's not official. It's nobody's name. Professor is a description. And so is my. If, however, the word my was not there, professor becomes part of his name. So Mrs. or Mr. Professor Henry. Now you're saying that those are both components of the name that you're calling him. So the distinction is, does it describe him as a professor or does it call him Professor something? So A is wrong because my would cause this to not be capitalized. Same thing with her mom. If I say mom, I'm using a name. So if I just address my mom and I say mom, that's a name. That's going to be capitalized. I'm giving her that name in saying it that way and addressing her with it. If I say her mom, my mom, their mom, now mom is a descriptive word, not a name. So again, B is wrong because her mom would be capitalized or would be not capitalized. It's a description. It's like saying her book, no different. Aunt Lydia is an example of what I've been talking about. It doesn't say my Aunt Lydia or her Aunt Lydia. It says Aunt Lydia. You're bringing aunt into her name. That entire thing, Aunt Lydia, is her name. That is correct in capitalization because you would capitalize both parts, just like you would capitalize a first and last name, Emily Smith. Number 12. So now we have one with professor that took out the my or their or her. Now A is correct because it's Professor Jane. You're giving her that name. The girl's mom, so mom would not be capitalized there because it's a description, not a title. Same with my cousin. I could say cousin June, and that would be giving her that as a name, and they would both be capitalized. But to say my cousin is a title, not a name. Same with my Aunt Georgie. What you're saying is my aunt named Georgie. We all have an aunt. Maybe not all of us. Most of us have aunts or uncles. That is not a name. That is not a distinguishment of someone unless you put it in their name, Aunt Georgie. That is all you really need to know about capitalization. This will be built back into English 1 when English 1 gets redesigned shortly. So unless you're taking this mock in March or April of 2019, you will have seen that. You'll be ready for that. If you are taking this mock the minute that I'm putting it out, because I'm putting it out for a few of you right now, that's all you need to know. That's how those questions will look if you get them. There's not going to be anything more tricky. Obviously, you need to know how cities and states work. If you look at D on number 11, that's incorrect because these are supposed to be capitalized. So if we had Wichita, Kansas, it would be, I actually have Wichita misspelled there. It's actually spelled like this. Wichita, Kansas, the KS would all be capital. But if you spelled out Kansas, you would just capitalize the K. Most of us are good on city-state. Number 13. So I have these labeled extra content. That's only relevant to those of you that are seeing this right after it's made. 13 is in an extra content category as well. You've seen this if you took Mock 4 or Mock 5. It's exactly the same example because it only appears in one way. This is the had begun, had began, has begun, has began thing. Last year, James decided to run for political office. By the end of last term, so we're in past tense, he had begun. So he had begun. The word has is present. We are not present tense. We are past tense. That's how you determine the had. I don't know why I can't spell, probably because I'm trying to write at the same time. The began or begun. Began is active. Begun is passive. This sentence puts that word in a very passive sense. I explained that thoroughly in the last mock, version 5. So if you want to go back to that, you can. Number 14 is where we put the sentences in order. That one is going to be D. I've explained that in all of the mocks. I'm not going to go through that one. The first sentence, number 1 here, is the intro. You always find your intro sentence, find the 3 subjects that they list, and proceed to put the sentences in the order you see them here. Discipline should be the first sentence, focus should be the second, study skills should be the third. And that is choice D. A lot of times the answers on those, if you even have a remote clue of what's supposed to go where, that's all that's required. So keep in mind, you may not have to scrutinize. When I look at one of these, I glance at the answers before I ever start to determine when I figure out who's first, when I figure out what should go right here. Do I eliminate any answers? In this case, I eliminate 2 of the 4 just by knowing what's supposed to be first. Then, by knowing what's supposed to be second, I eliminate the other one. There's no reason to agonize over 5 sentences because once you get to here, you've answered your question. And that's true whether 1 or 5 was supposed to be in the front because there's only 2 of each. 15, correct punctuation. This is a mixed punctuation question. That's why I have it labeled as English 1 and 2. They can say which is correct and then all 4 answers are along the same lines. Or they can say which is correct and each answer is on a totally different wavelength than the others. So A is apostrophes. And it says it's not necessary, which should be it is not necessary, and we're lacking a necessary apostrophe, so A is out. B is a commas question. The problem with B is when we put a comma in the middle of the sentence, we do that because there's a conjunction. There's either like a but or and here after the comma, or there's a conjunction up here like when or after or whenever, and we don't have that. So we do not need a comma here because there is no conjunction in the sentence anywhere. C is a colon. Colons introduce lists that spontaneously appear in a sentence. That is not at all what we have happening here. So we end up with D, which is the correct use of a semicolon. Semicolons are used when we have 2 kind of short sentences, but they are sentences. Each of them can be independent. And we put them together so that stylistically we don't sound choppy. In order to do that, we use a semicolon. So again, no conjunctions. B had no conjunctions. D had no conjunctions. It worked in D because we used a semicolon. It did not work in B because we used a comma. 16 is all apostrophes, and the correct answer is C. Most of these are fairly obvious, I think, for you guys. When you say and, you follow the same rule that you follow when you use and in subject-verb agreement. And joins the subjects together as one, and as one they. So you would not put an apostrophe with each of them because that separates them. The last name Jones is Jones, right? But here you can see the Joneses came over for dinner. The way they say the Joneses, they're not talking about one person. It wouldn't make sense if it's one person to call them the Smith, right? If you say the Smiths are coming over, you have to be referring to more than one person. If we refer to more than one person on a word that already has an S, we're going to have an apostrophe and another S, or we're going to have an apostrophe like this. 17 is subject-verb agreement. I'm starting to add in some of the things that the Hesse likes to do, where you fill in a word. Each is a quantity word that is singular quantity. So anytime you have the word each, it's each has his or her, not their. We misuse the word their all the time. In spoken English, we use they to be when we don't know a gender, as well as when we're plural. In this case, you have to commit to either his or her, or in rare instances, its. They will only have one of those there. The concern most of you have when you see that is you're like, but how do you know it's a guy or a girl? It doesn't matter because they're not going to put both of them. If they had put his as choice A and then they turned around and put her as choice B, you couldn't answer the question because they're the same. Same thing with 18. It's a fill in the blank subject verb agreement. The faculty is a group. The group is in agreement. They're working together because there's no sign of disagreement here. So it's it. It really helps to switch things to he, she, they, it. This is it. The faculty is a thing. It's one thing. So it has. It works the same way that she or he works. 19 is quote punctuation. There's a couple of places we look. The reason I put this in here is I'm still occasionally seeing people that are not sure about this being capitalized, especially when it's in the second part of the sentence, like how we see it in D. That is the beginning of someone's spoken sentence. When somebody begins speaking, we capitalize the first letter of the first thing that they say. So A and C are out right away for that reason. When someone begins speaking, we capitalize the beginning of their first word. The other thing that's important here, she should not be capitalized unless it's D, where she is the very first word. Anytime something's the very first word, you're going to capitalize it, right? Whether that's the first word of the whole entire thing or the first word of the spoken quote, you're going to capitalize those. This, however, does not work. She asked him, nor does this work, is part of the sentence. You can't separate that by itself. It can't stand on its own. So that's how I got rid of B. And that leaves me with D. It does not matter whether you have the quote first or the she asked him first. So you didn't pick D because they have she asked him at the front. That does not matter. What matters is that wherever they decide to put that attribution, it's done correctly. That's why we picked D. That and the capitalization. 20 is quote punctuation, where a sentence, a big long sentence, is split up. And again, we look for capitalization. All of this is one continuous sentence. There are no periods here. So anything that does have a period when it's a continuing quote is out. That got rid of A, B, and C for me. What else can I look for? Once you determine which one has commas on both ends, you need to determine that that is not capitalized, because that would only be capitalized if a new sentence is starting. We do not start sentences with but, because but goes with something said right before the word but. So that should not be capitalized. Prefix ante or anta is before The way that you saw this in your spelling list was anteroom, which means before room. It's Latin, which means the waiting room where you would be before you are seen. The last three are sentence structures. For sentence structures, we always do exactly the same thing. First, we look for fragments. I can tell you none of these three have fragments. Then we go through and we look for subordinate conjunctions. Whenever, however, as, because, when, after, before. Then when we get all that done, those can be labeled complex. We look for coordinate conjunctions. Then we make a distinguishment between a coordinate conjunction that has a subject after it, which is compound, or that doesn't. I'm going to do all three of these together. I'm going to join them together. Then we're going to look at the instructions. A is a simple sentence. And actually, let me do these in order so that it's not confusing. There are no fragments, so I am skipping step one, but step one is valid. I'm going to look for subordinate conjunctions. I see one right here. If you start a sentence with when, that is going to be subordinate, which makes this complex. Because, same thing. So C and D on that last one are complex because they have subordinates. C on number 23 is complex because it has whenever. That is the only one for that one. This is supposed to say though, not thought, sorry. Though is a subordinate conjunction. That's complex. I will edit that as soon as I exit the recording. All the others, oh nope, however. However is always complex. So here's the ones we labeled as complex because of the following words: though, however, whenever, when, and because. All the rest of them either have no conjunction or they have a coordinate conjunction. The only one that has no conjunction is B of number 24. So number 22A, but could not see. There is no subject here. So if you took out the but, that wouldn't give you the ability to make two sentences. That's why A is simple. B, on the other hand, is exactly the same, except it's got I. Now, if you took out but and you put a period, you could say, I went to the corner of the street. I could not see the car. That is compound in its definition, as well as if there's a semicolon between two sentences, because the definition of compound is it can be split into two sentences pretty easily. A simple can't. There's no way to fix could not see the car and have that be a sentence that stands alone. Same thing with 23. And could not stop jumping is simple because there's no easy way to split those two halves. I went to work around 4 and I came home late. So the I there makes that compound. And then but I read. So that's compound. A on number 24 says it ran. Don't forget that it is just as much of a subject as I or she. And then B is very clearly simple. It has no conjunctions at all. The car slowed down at the intersection. There's no conjunctions in that. That is definitely a simple. So that is it for version number 6 of Mock English. Let me know if you have particular questions, but work them first. Find what you're missing in the strategy. Try to use anything that you missed to really figure out what you may still be missing when you're put on the spot. Let me know what your score is, but let me know as a full set. You are seeing this test as a set. So you want to make sure you don't send me this individually. You send me, extra mock set 3 reading, the version number for reading, and then this many right out of this many total. Math, the version number for math, so on. So I will see you guys later.